is going to be really challenging because I'm literally going to be at the conference, and I have a meeting with the Bloomsbury editor that published my book just before our meeting. So I'm going to have to be schlepping around my laptop. And I was just thinking today, I'm going to have to find a place to do this. So I'll figure that out.
Angelica, your hotel room, I assume, is not in the same building that your meeting is in, your previous meeting with Bloomsbury.
Well, you mean at the MLA?
Yeah.
Well, at the MLA, I'll be meeting the editor at they're at the book exhibit.
So you're not close to your home base at that point at all?
No, because I'm staying with a friend.
Okay. I may email MLA. What building are you going to be in? The book exhibit. I'll email them and ask them if they might have a private space that you could use to facilitate that.
Yeah, we can figure that out.
Okay. I will say also, often the room that they do the career center in is often very large and not very highly populated.
And I think that is usually the same as the building that at least it used to be the book fair, I mean, years ago. Welcome, Chris. Are you okay with us recording? I've asked everybody else.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So there's little clusters of us that know each other. I believe Angelica, Joey, and Chris know each other from Emory. Is that right? Yeah. And Ian and I have known each other for 30 years. I was several years behind him at the PhD program in English and Comp Lit at Columbia. And you're all new to me, so with the exception of Ian. So I'm delighted that you've all agreed to do this panel, and I feel like we've got a very good mix to create a wonderful discussion. So I guess we sort of already have said hello and that kind of thing. If you'd like to take the opportunity to just take a couple minutes to share what it is that you hope to speak about, and maybe questions you have for each other as well. But just to give us, first of all, an orientation of what you might like to speak about. So anybody who'd like to start, we'll just go in no particular order.
Okay, I'll jump in if you like. Well, I spoke with Kieran because I wanted to get a sense of exactly what it was we're going to be doing. And my sense was that he's given us a lot of room to do what we need to or want to do. My sense is, and Kieran, correct me if I got this right, is that we'll be talking about career choices relative to the PhD. That's what I understood, at least in my case. And so what I will be doing is talking about, yes, I did pursue the sort of traditional, tenure track job, that kind of thing. But I wanted to work in Shakespeare. And the other thing is, I've never really felt that scholarship should be something that feels separate from my real life or the real world or the questions in the real world. And so in the 90s, when I started in the field, critical race studies was just beginning in the field. And so I want to talk about the sort of pushbacks and where the field has grown a little bit, but more importantly, why I chose that as a path forward, because I thought it had a sort of practical purpose, or certainly can have a practical purpose, in a way that moved Shakespeare studies and literature from that sort of aesthetic, sort of belles lettres sort of thing, to something really meaningful and useful that students can connect to in their real lives. And now in 2021, for sure, with questions of race so much on everybody's mind, it's across our, it's constantly before us. I think that a field like critical race, I think, is urgent. for what I'm calling racial literacy. And so I'll be talking a little bit about that.
Actually, maybe I can pick up from that, Ian, because while this is not something I initially thought I would talk about, but what you just said kind of took me back to a moment in my life when I had actually left the academy. I kind of bailed out of a not very satisfying graduate program. And because I remember standing in the classroom one day and thinking, what am I doing? You know, what am I doing? What are you students here for? What am I? And I was so unsettled by that I decided if I can't answer that question, there's really no point in in soldiering on. And I left, and for a bunch of years I did kind of what under Obama we learned to just refer to in this blanket description of community organizing. I lived in Memphis. I did a lot of work around racial justice and economic justice, and we got pretty into heavy duty stuff: police violence, police brutality, and that led to another moment when I remember when I was sitting in the police department talking with the chief of police at the time, with comrades, not just me alone, but about a case we were protesting that involved what we thought was an egregious breach of people's rights. And I suddenly there too thought, I'm not cut out for encounters with that entail this degree of violence in the community. And I thought what I'm really good at is what I am now doing, which is thinking, reading, thinking carefully about how meaning is made, how meanings are made through cultural forms, and how we can use that ability to change the world, make the world a better place. And so I decided that I would actually go back to what I had abandoned. And I then chose more carefully what I would study. I ended up getting a PhD in comparative literature, which is, for better or for worse, where I've been working. And I find myself thinking about this literally, I mean, every day is perhaps a bit exaggerated, because I'm sure there are days when I don't think about this. I just pay my bills and make my meals and do what I have to do. But it's constantly in my mind. How does that choice I made at different moments, how do I still feel about that in terms of what, for lack of a better word, I would call a meaningful life, and a meaningful life that engages, that has to do just with me, myself, and people I love, and me, myself, and people I come into contact with, like the students that I teach. Yeah, and the answer, I guess, is it feels right. And I guess some of the details of that we might get into in our session. So by way of introduction, that's me.
Thanks, Angelica. Thank you, Ian.
I'm happy to jump in. I've had a bit of a meandering path that in retrospect is it feels very organic and evolutionary. But looking back, I couldn't have anticipated that I'd be doing the things that I'm doing. So my story is that I went within 1 year after I finished undergrad, I started my PhD in Latin American and Iberian cultures. And I, was very young. I don't think my brain was fully developed. I knew I loved research and writing, and I'd had some really wonderful professors. You've heard this story before. And, I pursued the PhD and I really enjoyed it. But within a few years of being in the program, I realized that there were certain things that I liked more and certain things I didn't like as much. So, I loved working with students. I really loved working with people on writing. I was moonlighting in children's publishing pretty much the whole time I was in graduate school, working on children's and young adult books for literary agents. I tried interning at the library on campus. I was at Columbia. I worked at the writing center. So loved working with writers, loved working with students, loved the research and writing, didn't like teaching Spanish at all. I think teaching language requires like such a special kind of creativity. And it was something, I'm a career counselor now, that's a spoiler alert. So, when we think about things like, there's lots of things we're good at and then certain things we're good at, but like, I think the language they use is burnout strengths, right? Things that we can do, but we don't find energizing. And I think that was the thing that I was like, I could get better at this, but I'm not motivated to do it, right? So I didn't even go on the academic job market. I actually became involved in the MLA right at the last year of my graduate program. They had a program called Connected Academics at the time, to introduce and help later stage PhD students, or I guess there were folks across class years and recent PhDs learn about career diversity and engage in some professional development. And that was a really transformational experience for me. One, because it gave me a lot of structure to engage in career exploration. I had to do informational interviews. I had to, build a resume and create a LinkedIn. And I was learning about career development as a field as well. And so by the time I finished, I remember one moment that was really pivotal for me was, after all these years of teaching language and really struggling through teaching language and culture classes, even though I loved putting together a syllabus, I just didn't like teaching it. I developed and led a career development workshop, and I was like, oh, I really enjoy teaching this. And so I pretty quickly, within about, I think it was 3 months of finishing my program, I got a job in career development at Columbia. And I've been at Columbia since 2009, and first as a graduate student and now as a staff member. And then over the past couple of years, in supporting students around kind of their first exposures to the workplace and reflecting on, what their interests are, what they care about, navigating first internships and first jobs, and also being someone who had been in graduate school for so long myself and had been a student for so long myself, also kind of grappling with my own experience as a worker. I became really interested in the work of social psychologists and organizational psychologists. I've never studied social sciences before, except, the things that are humanistic social sciences, through a cultural studies program. And so actually in fall 2020, I decided to use my tuition benefits, and I'm currently pursuing my master's in social and organizational psychology at Teachers College at Columbia. And I'm really enjoying that. And one of my goals heading into that was to build, more qualitative research skills from a social science methodology, as I'm learning interviewing and survey design. And it's really funny for me to hear social scientists talk about things like there's this stuff called like archival research and document analysis, which always tickles me. So I'm like, yeah, have you heard of the humanities? So I'm at a stage where, I'm actually trying to figure out what I want to do next, and really increasingly interested in doing organizational research. So there's been a lot of threads for me that have been kind of consistent, kind of this love of research and writing, a real deep interest in supporting the development of others and working with them one-on-one. And I think that ties in with kind of my love of storytelling and helping people make sense of their own stories, organizational research. I think, Angelica, when you were talking about kind of cultural analysis, it's been interesting to articulate to folks in this psychology realm kind of the threads that connect what I actually did as a PhD student and kind of what they do as social organizational psychologists. And I'm like, well, I've been interested in how we make sense of culture all along, but before I was doing it mediated through texts pretty much exclusively, and now I'm gaining these new tools to actually talk to people. So that's sort of my journey, and I think I will probably pull out some of these thematic threads and structure what I say around that.
Thank you, Sarah. That's great.
I'm happy to jump in. It's really interesting to hear everyone's stories. Thanks so far. It's been really, it's good to know that everyone doesn't have a straight and narrow path. So I guess for me, it starts, I'm a curator, and so I'm considered academic staff at the university where I am, not faculty. And many years ago, my first really full-time curatorial gig was at the Museum of Contemporary Art of Georgia in Atlanta. And I did not have a degree in art history. And in fact, I did not have a graduate degree at all. And two of my colleagues pulled me aside and had this very Southern conversation, which, I mean, it sounded really nice. And once it was over, I realized that I had just been scolded. It felt sweet, but it stung afterwards. And essentially, they were letting me know that they had more academic authority in the field of art history than I did, even though they had far less curatorial experience. And so I felt like if I was banging my head on the ceiling that early in my career in Atlanta, I was doomed. And so I immediately started applying for graduate programs. And I started looking at art history programs and was completely horrified by art history. It seemed to me a very nationalist, conservative academic project that really held very little interest for me. I ended up finding a program at an art school where they taught making together with either historical or theoretically based, more traditional kinds of research, so that they worked in conjunction with one another. And I remember actually after getting that degree, one of the people who had put the program of study together confessed to me that they weren't sure if they were giving us a new set of tools or if they were luring us out on a ledge. And I always felt like it was both. And so I got my graduate degrees from an art school and then also from an interdisciplinary program at a research university. And for me, I was trying to think research and making together, right? So thinking of artistic practice as a research method, that artistic practice could make epistemic claims, actually. And I mean, there is a kind of a different path for this that already exists. So for instance, often art history students will take art classes, right? And so when you see art and art history departments together, usually art history it was an art program and they needed the artist to understand art history, or initially it was an art history program and they needed the art historians to understand the object of their study. And for me, I was less interested in the making as an object of study than I was as a way to know each other and the world around us outside of textual or numeric representation. So outside of not a qualitative or a quantitative method, something different. So for me, being in these programs that were stressing hybridity and interdisciplinarity put me in a situation where I had to learn several different languages. And that was a deep frustration in my education because I was always working twice as hard as everyone else in more traditional disciplinary programs. When I was speaking in theory or history or archives, I had to prove I wasn't a dilettante maker. And when I was in studio critiques, I had to prove that I wasn't an armchair philosopher. And so I was always kind of doubling down on both sides of the fence, and it always seemed so unfair. But actually, it's the thing that has been most valuable in my career because I can now speak different languages. So if I'm speaking about art and someone in the hard sciences wants to take me down, I have some chops, you know. I guess it's a little bit, I'll go a little bit further than that also. I think that there's something that artists have to offer back to other kinds of researchers because in my experience, and I'm going to generalize here, obviously, this is not true in every case, but in my experience, researchers coming from traditional, more discrete disciplines are not being critical about the forms that they're using. You know, the forms are vessels that they pour their work into that authorize their claims. And for me, in a kind of critique-based artistic education, you're constantly being asked what the relationship of the form is to the knowledge production, right? Because when we don't pay attention to our form, all manner of sins get swept under the carpet. And so I'm particularly interested in that right now. And I guess the very last thing I'll say is that when I finished my PhD, you know, visiting assistant professorship right after, and then after that, I took a postdoc in a curatorial department. And one of my mentors said to me, if you take this postdoc in a curatorial department, your career as an academic in an academic department as a faculty member is over. And I think it created enough of a chip on my shoulder that kept me publishing because I mean, I'm interested enough to continue doing the writing, but I also felt like, again, it's like doing twice the work. So anyway, at this point, I curate at a museum at a Research One, and my job is actually curator for research. So I work with researchers and contemporary artists together on hybrid projects. And that's very rare opportunity. It exists almost nowhere else.
Thanks, Joe.
All right. I guess I'm up. So I'm embarrassed to say that there's not a whole lot of theory about my situation. I do have a winding path. I have an MFA in creative writing. I kind of rode teaching that for 2 years during the recession, and then thought I could weather the rest of the recession by joining a PhD program, which I did. And you know, over the course of those 5 years, I felt, to a certain extent, that I got seduced by the academic lifestyle, right? The offices with the very tall roofs, ceilings rather, you know, talking about ideas, all of that. I mean, I love all of that stuff. And that was something that I was really into. But my area was work in American culture, right? And I was teaching on a VAP the year after my PhD program. And I found myself in a couple of situations. One, because I was teaching about labor and work. My PhD is like in American Studies, but same program that Joey was in and that Angelica taught in until they destroyed the program. Which is its own thing. But I found myself in a position where I was kind of constantly giving undergrads career advice about things, and I was saying things like, don't try to get a job in anything you're passionate about because that just makes you more easily commodified. And I was giving them a lot of like immaterial Marxist critiques of doing all of these labors. And I also found myself in a situation where I wasn't going to be able to renew my VAP, at least at that time. It was there, and I didn't really take the job market very seriously. I was just having our second child at that time, and it was kind of a intense situation. So I didn't apply to any of the good jobs, which only exist in September. So I found myself like increasingly on this downward spiral of these increasingly humiliating job applications. And I was just like, at a certain point, I needed to take some of my own career advice and stop trying to do something I'm passionate about and completely quit academia and never look back, which is what I did. I made the hard pivot that summer. It took me about 6 months. And so I joined user research, right? Joined a technology situation. I found out about the job by literally typing in PhD into LinkedIn job search, and it was a preferred qualification for some user research jobs once you like get rid of all the medical stuff. And I networked my way into my first job. I worked at Home Depot, or work at Home Depot still, as a researcher. I now managed a research team, and it's not glamorous work. It's actually super boring. We're trying to sell more hammers at the company, online mostly, and we're trying to make it easier for people to do that, right? And it's intellectually stimulating insofar as like you get to talk to a lot of people, you get to kind of analyze things. I did try to at first like throw down some weird theory every now and then on people. Like I think my first deck, and that the wildest thing is that there's no more Microsoft Word. Everything is PowerPoint deck. That's the only way that you can communicate in the corporate world. And so like I have a little slide about like bricolage or something about like the tools people are using on this. And it actually got me a big points because the director of the search team at that time, he had gone to University of Chicago and he loved anthropology as a concept. And so he was way into that. But in any case, like I did this for purely pragmatic reasons, right? I never knew about this then. And I'm going to be joining Meta in January, like literally the day after this. And I'm going to be working on the content creator platform for Facebook app, which is how artists and nonprofits and all of this create content and interact with their fans, or, you know, make livings off of this in all these variety of different ways. There is some stuff there that appeals to me about this that Home Depot didn't. And like having 3 years at Home Depot, like I would not have been able to get to a point where I can work on culture stuff again, right? Because at the end of the day, Facebook is the company that it is, but like almost all in life culture right now in America is mediated through technology in some kind of way. And Facebook and other platforms like this like touch upon it and affect it. And so it feels like I'm actually going to be able to do work that bears on people's lives again, in a strong way. And I know that it's like the research team at Facebook, which is like 600, you know, people, and they're always like trying to stand in the way of like the profit motive to do this, most famously in the news recently. But it does feel like, you know, there is some way to make impact. And that is another thing about like the corporate world. You do a research project, and then within 2 weeks somebody's doing something about it, even if it is something as trivial as selling more hammers. But in this case, who knows what it might be. So that's sort of where it is. And for me, like, again, I can't stress enough, but money is the motivating factor to get out of this. So it's like I'm trying to figure out how to do this in an uplifting way, except for that, like, when I joined Facebook, I'll have sextupled my salary from 3 years ago. So like that's a big thing, and it's something that's actually possible that people are starting to realize, I think, about getting academic degrees, if this is like even vaguely career oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chris. I spent a decade at an industrial supply company selling nuts and bolts better after the PhD. So I'm familiar with that slog, and and some of the opportunities that it presents as well. I'm not exactly sure how to kind of lead a discussion about how we might speak to each other. So if anybody feels moved to respond or kind of touch a connection point with something that another panelist spoke about, I would appreciate that.
I have two thoughts, Kieran. One is, yeah, I actually have something to say in response to what we've all been talking about. Um, but just so I don't forget my other thought, just pragmatically speaking, in relation to the MLA session, um, I I I was wondering whether um, we might want to, we or you, Kieran, being the you, might want to have some kind of framework for how we're going to proceed. My worry is, as fun and stimulating as it can be, just to have an open-ended conversation where we respond to each other. Um, but who knows where that would take us? And I don't. Um, so I'm kind of torn between just the sheer bravado of, well, let's see where we go, and the fear that, God, that could just become this tangle of stuff that might not yield anything. Um, so that's just a thought. So maybe before we end today, we can collectively decide on that. The initial comment I was going to make was actually triggered by what you talked about, Chris, and the space uh, in which we find ourselves, both in our life and our work and in our conversations, that's bordered on the one hand by these lofty aspirations, the follow your passion. And I'm with you there, Chris. While I'm not quite as explicit as saying to my students, don't follow your passion, but that language really makes me very uneasy. Makes me really uneasy. But on the other hand, we have this rhetoric ready to go, and I, in fact, was myself in this little introduction. I did it myself. Changing the world. Follow your passion. Like, what the hell? Um, so that's and at the same time, I think it's real. I don't want to just dismiss it. But on the other hand, is that utterly pragmatic Marxist material conditions, how we live our life, making money, having a job, having income, taking care of our families. That. And it reminds me, once many years ago, when I was still a graduate student, actually, I was invited to be on a big MLA panel. I can't remember. It was Gayatri Spivak who organized this. It was kind of a Marxist framework. And I got up and said to these assembled luminaries and colleagues, at the end of the day, this is a job. At the end of the day, it's a job. And I was shamed for doing that. I was literally shamed for saying that. But it is. And so somewhere on that spectrum between these incredibly high know thyself, transform the world aspirations, which I actually also hold to, and the other thing that has to do with working conditions, with work-life balance, with income. What are we doing, and how do we feel about what we're doing?
I have to say, I skate right down the middle of that line. That's what I feel like, because on the one hand, my work here has been very precarious in the sense that it's grant funded. So when the grant runs out, the gig is up, right? And I actually think it's important work that needs to exist in the world. And I won't say this in our session, but I have raised $5 million and gotten it endowed. Because now that it's endowed, neither the provost nor the chancellor can ever cut it. And people who are interested in the things I'm interested in, now there's at least one destination. It's not enough for everybody, but it didn't exist before. On the other hand, I'm surrounded by colleagues that think that because we work to support art and at a nonprofit and in higher education, that I need to think about my work in the world as like some act of benevolence, and I think that's just a crock of shit. Like when I have negotiated for salaries and raises and things like that, I explained to my boss that I love my job, but not more than myself and my family. And if I can't support my family, then I can't support the museum. And those things should not be in conflict. But I live in a culture that maybe not explicitly, but at least implicitly believes that I should think of my work as service. And I don't feel that way at all. In fact, one way that I have tried to articulate my relationship to the things that I do, because I work for an institution that's exploitive. And so I have come to describe my work as ambivalent stewardship. I'm here to get something done, but I am not here to save the institution at the cost of the reason I'm here. So if the institution needs to come down, so be it. But I'm reluctant to walk away, because if I walk away, someone else takes my place and does it differently.
So we have 5 minutes of our allotted time remaining. I wondered, does anybody have to leave immediately? Like, could we take an extra 15 minutes just to kind of address the question of how we want to sort of shape the discussion subsequent to each of the panelists' individual? And if it takes, we can do it in shorter than that. Great.
Fine.
Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Angelica, I agree with you that we having a sort of a framework for the discussion would be ideal. But I agree with you also that it's something that kind of needs to emerge collectively, ideally, and it may just be that we go away and all think about what we've spoken about, and over email kind of have some suggestions as to a couple of thematic strands that we may seek to weave together in the discussion. I mean, that's just my initial thought.
I wonder if one way to approach it is almost sort of, I'm going to call it like alumni panel style, where kind of first going around and everyone kind of briefly shares their story, sort of like we did today. And it sounds like there were certain themes that were emerging. So I think this connects with Kieran, what you were just saying. I could imagine sort of, I mean, this is a fairly structured approach and we wouldn't need to take it, but one option would be then for kind of a series of facilitated questions to around these thematic areas of thematic overlap to kind of course people can respond to each other, but sort of approaching that from first, like, who are these people and what is their story in brief, and then kind of grappling with some of those themes and tensions that kind of, I think, Angelica, you brought up one and that came up for you and what Chris shared, and kind of taking it in that possible structure.
Just to sort of remind you guys that as far as time structure, the initial proposal was that we would take 30 minutes. It's 75 minutes total, so it would be 30 minutes for introductions and the panelists, which would basically give me a couple of minutes to introduce you all at the beginning. Then maximum of 5 minutes per panelist to tell their story and kind of introduce their thematic strand. And then that's 30 minutes. Then I was thinking potentially 20 minutes for discussion amongst the panelists, and then open it up to whatever audience we have to round out the time. So that's just a kind of a temporal structure within which to, the formal vessel into which to board the panel, as it were.
I'm wondering kind of who we anticipate may be in the room, in the Zoom room. I think kind of seeing the description, I would speculate that maybe folks who are also grappling with their own relationship with their job maybe attracted to the panel, and it could be a mix of current PhD students and folks who are still in the community, whether they're probably mostly faculty, but I imagine there could be a handful of other folks in the room, and what they might be looking to learn from the panel, or what ideas they might be looking to engage with.
I definitely think, as Angelica spoke about in her kind of stating that academia is a job, that does kind of violate a certain taboo within academia, and it's sad and unfortunate that there was a shaming response, but it's not surprising, and so it is, I guess, the advantage that we have as a panel is that we are sort of bolstered by those of us who have left to sort of speak things that are harder to say from within. Like, Joey, for example, you said I raised 5 million and I'm a doubt, but I'm not going to say that on the panel, which is great. Like, I understand that. That's the ambivalent stewardship, because you're steward of that money. It's your job, and it ensures, in a sense, your own security. But it's also something that there's a kind of a pressure not to speak about. So whereas Chris is in a position to, just overtly say, I've increased my salary by a factor of 6 by taking a job at Meta from where I was, in academia, and not to, obviously, money is not, it's a necessity, and we may or like more of it, but there are other, the tension you point to, Angelica, in terms of the lofty goals and then holding them, and at the same time recognizing how it, as Joey was saying, and Chris too, how it can be misleading to graduate students to sort of being encouraged to the ledge, so I do think that invitation to the ledge is definitely one of the thematic strands that many of us share.
One of the other thematic strands, and I wonder if this might be something to think about, because when everybody was talking, it's sort of like we kept talking about we kind of made our own way in these situations, and like if we recognize that this is a job, like I almost feel like, I'm happy to be the bad guy and say some Marxist shit about the university on a panel, because I'm not going back to a university. But it's like if we take it as this premise that this is a job and we're doing this, like what does that mean for what you're doing, right? If you're going to stay in that system, you can make it more meaningful, right? That, like, I'm not trying to say that meaning and like the theory behind what you're doing and the goals are all this like are unimportant, because they actually are super important. It's what can sustain you in a lot of these types of things. My problem with the university is always that it took that as the only thing that should sustain you. Like, you live on this alone, but like, I think that there's good strategies to think about this. So if people are trying to discern what to do with their academic path, whether they're a PhD, early career, even late career person, one of the things that I think might be an interesting way of doing this is sort of like making your own way in this circumstance, whether that is like you have to put your list of things up. If you're already in a situation here and you feel like you have a certain amount of power inside of the system to help students change things and all that, that's great. For me, it felt like an academic career was kind of foreclosed by a lot of different things, and so I had to find it elsewhere. And like within that, I'm trying to make meaning, but the other stuff like is pretty sustaining as well.
What I liked about the presentation that I heard, I liked the fact that the various narratives that were spoken tell us something about how one can in fact navigate the challenges of a certain kind of career that was held up to us in a particular way, but we all found different ways to make that meaningful for us individually. I think, as Sarah was saying, that to the people who might be attracted to this, who might attend, will be precisely those people who are thinking about that basic question that we've always asked, which is, what do we do with this thing called some sort of PhD in something, right? So I think those are the people going to be in the room. So on the one hand, I think, Angelica, that the idea of saying that, this is a job. I'm not sure that today you would be shamed for saying that. I think that that is patently clear to people because we have struggled to find a way in the system now. Well, I think that people will get that, and so I think it'll be fine to say that. I also think that and people have said a lot about why the university doesn't work for them, et cetera, et cetera. And I think those things are fine to say. But if I were attending this, and this may be just my personality, I would want to hear, in fact, how people did find ways to make it through.
Mhm.
How people found, which is what kept me riveted in this conversation, right? It wasn't just about, oh my goodness, it's a terrible system, the university is bad, etc., because we've heard that many times, and maybe it needs to be articulated once again, perhaps. But we should not lose the power and benefit of what we have among this group, right? Which is, we found different ways to think this through, to challenge ourselves, to challenge the system even, but to find ways of doing that. And what I like too is that we all in somewhere at different places. Some of us have, I stayed in that place, say for example, Angelica left and returned and is finding a different way to do that. And Chris is saying, well, I'm about to start a new adventure, right? So there's a sort of arc of different paths still, which I found fascinating, just as a kind of, storyteller. So we're all at different places, and I think that variety, I think, can serve us really well. So that's not so much about actual content, but I think there's enough there for us to be useful to people who do attend to listen, and for among ourselves to ask, to just listen to ourselves and speak among ourselves about how we in fact managed to do that. I'm not sure I have any answers for any of this, quite frankly. That's not what I'm saying. But I was just fascinated and intrigued by that people found different ways to confront and deal with what we find as a challenge.
I love that. I love what you just proposed, Ian. And I could see that being, in a way, a kind of structure for the session. The kind of, what comes to mind is the Odyssey. Odysseus, every time he arrives somewhere, he's asked, so where have you come from? And, what are you doing here? If we take that notion of the different journeys we've been on, and what it means to us to have decided to set up tent where we are now, and how that feels, because those are choices that we've made within the constraints of the possibilities that are given to us. So if we can, we will acknowledge the constraints. I mean, choices. Despite the American emphasis on freedom of choice, I don't believe in it really. I think it's a very limited kind of set of possibilities. But nevertheless, how we arrived where we've arrived, and how we make that meaningful, and how it's meaningful to us. And I think that would be a great way of thinking about how we engage one another.
Yeah, something really struck me, Angelica. I feel like this language of like decision and choice, kind of thinking about these like kind of moments in the journeys where, sometimes, really consciously you're making a choice to do one thing or another. I know many of the choices I made in graduate school felt like I was just like bumbling my way through. The hidden curriculum of graduate education is real. But I love that kind of idea of reflecting on those moments of choice in retrospect and in our journeys, and what were the circumstances of those, and and then kind of how we made meaning in different moments.
Well, I can certainly open up with an introduction that kind of addresses both, or just says we're going to initially speak about how we've arrived where we are, and how do we make meaning in this place where we, as Angelica said, have set up tent, it's we've arrived at a point in the discussion where I'm having a little bit of a light bulb as to, well, why did I want to do this in the first place? Because to put this panel together, because honestly, I had a great deal of enthusiasm and passion about it back in winter of last year. And then as it came time to sort of contact you guys again and get it together for the actual convention, I was questioning within myself. I was like, why did I want to do this? And what am I really trying to do here? So I think the answer to that for me that has emerged is, what meanings have I made of the PhD in my life? And how has the PhD made my life meaningful? So it's kind of, one is the emphasis on where I've tried to steer the ship, and then the other is just, well, what has been given, what's been determined in my life as a result of I was born into a family of economics PhDs in Dublin, Ireland. My mom and dad are both PhDs. So to become a voting member of the family, I felt I had to get a PhD. That was just in order to have a voice. It felt like the minimum requirement for admission, and just within my own kind of psychological journey, I guess. But yeah, and it's a strange position to be in as the presider, because I'm not presenting, but I'm also, like, in a way, doing my best to curate or shape the conversation. So yeah.
One thing I would like to add to the conversation, and Ian, really appreciate your remarks and your synthesis of what's going on here. That someone coming to hear the conversation would want to know what we've made of this question, right? But I want to just add that if I have set up a tent, it's one that can be very quickly collapsed.
Yeah.
Because I definitely, for myself, do not feel like I have arrived anywhere. And in fact, the director of the museum asked me just a couple of weeks ago, in order to negotiate, with me, what is it that I wanted to do? Did I want to be a dean? Did I want to be a provost? And, even if I think about what a curator does, I mean, curators often become directors, which is essentially a fundraiser. And even though I always thought that was the goal, it's so unappealing to me now. And so the answer I always give my mentors to that question, what do you want to do, is I want to work in a really great context. I can't name a job for you, that will make sense. Especially in an academic situation. It's not about that. I want to do something that feels congruent, and that's a contextual thing. It's not a title. So I just want to add that, to make meaning from the journey is not to say that we have arrived anywhere necessarily.
Which is why I use that's why I use the tent metaphor.
I was just going to say.
I feel the same way. Yeah.
It's
like
a necessity
portable
temporary
tent.
sleeping bag, on the way to somewhere else.
And it is the nature of most careers as well, one would argue, right? That one needs to grow and change careers too. That's what careers have been for the last, at least 40, 50 years. What's interesting is that within academia, it may not feel that we have tents. It may feel that we have been, boxed into a house, and we're trying to figure out how to move in there. So, I mean, that's the irony on the other side, but that's for another conversation.
Well, I want to respect your guys' time and thank you so much for your participation. And I will, let's be in dialogue over email. I will make an effort to type up some brief sense of an introduction and frame. And I welcome any suggestions for revisions to that or any further kind of. And I also imagine that some of the things that we've spoken about collectively will spark additional reflections between now and panels in 3 weeks' time. So if you are inspired to kind of respond to a point that you didn't have an opportunity to respond to, or it struck a note, please feel free also to reply all and put it out there.
Good, thank you.
Yes.
Great. Thanks for all the organizing.
Thank you.
It's nice meeting you all.
Yeah. Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you all. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.